As we return to the topic of generative artificial intelligence today, part 3 in a 4-part series, we continue to talk about what it means to be human and how we can be better humans based on who our God is. That's the conversation we began during Holy Week. Today I want to share a poem with you by William Blake. It's about courage, and it gets to the heart of what it means to be human. It jumps to mind because I saw it lived out recently by an Epiphany parishioner. The poem goes like this. Man was made for joy and woe, and when this we rightly know, through the world we safely go. Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. On Tuesday, this parishioner was telling me about her Monday. You may remember Monday as being incredibly hot. And she had just returned from being out of town for a while. She got home and the house had been closed up and it was all stuffy, and stifling, and nothing seemed right, and her husband was out of town, so she called him to complain. Decided to get out of the house, so she went to visit a neighbor. And on her way home from visiting the neighbor, she remembered there was nothing in the refrigerator. So she dropped by Safeway to get some milk because she knew she was going to want milk in her coffee the next morning. It was about 9 o'clock in the evening. And as she walked into Safeway, she passed a man loitering there. Pretty typical. He asked for money. Pretty typical. Said he was hungry. It's pretty typical. Yet unexpectedly, at least to her, out of her mouth came, "Well, what would you like to eat?" And he said, "Chicken." So she crossed the threshold and headed to the deli, only to find that it was closed. But there was a person in the back cleaning up, and she called out. She said, "Do you have any chicken?" And then mentioned with a shrug, "I told the guy outside that I was going to bring him some chicken." So the woman back there scrounged around and found a couple of chicken strips and heated them up and put them in a carry-out bag. So my friend bought her milk and then decided to pick up a couple of complimentary things for the chicken. She bought them and she put them in a separate bag, and she went outside and she handed the bag of chicken to the man. She said, "Here's your chicken." And he started to cry. And this is when her day flashed before her eyes, all of her complaining because of the suffering she had experienced, because of the inconveniences she had encountered, that all of that melted into joy because of that bag of chicken. Joy and woe are woven fine. And she asked him his name, and he said it was Larry. And then he told her he was having sort of a rough day. And she gave him a hug. It was the human thing to do because Larry, like her, is a soul divine, a sibling in this caste of the royal priesthood. That's our title as human beings given to us by 1 Peter. And the royal in this human title represents the heart and is the place where we exercise our actions. And the priesthood represents our soul and is oriented at all times towards God. You see, the heart and the soul are metaphysical elements of our ontological nature, as I talked about last Sunday. And the heart is the home of human freedom. Other words for the heart in Holy Scripture include spirit with a small s and will. And they represent the place where our character resides. It is the place from which we make decisions about how to act in the world. It was a hard choice to buy chicken for Larry. The heart and the soul, it's also important to know, are completely not the same thing. They are opposite things. They sit at the opposite end of our human nature, with the soul completely belonging to God and the heart under human management. Knowing the nature of heart and soul as metaphysical elements of ourselves is what I believe will enable us to remain the masters of the generative artificial intelligence that we humans have developed. Now, why do I make that claim? Because when we know ourselves as equals to all other people in the caste of the royal priesthood, we then understand our obligation to develop this new technology for the benefit of all people and for no other reason except for the benefit of all people. And if we do not, however, know ourselves, heart and soul, if we confine our thinking to our physiology as materialists do, then we might believe the soul and the heart to be made of neurons that work like tiny little robots, like a switchboard, if you will, that turn on and off in the brain and just give us a sense of our soul and a sense of our heart. And if that is true, what happens when a better switchboard comes along? One that answers all of our questions, one that tweaks our emotions, one that satiates our bodies with things that are pleasurable. That's a real possibility if we are nothing more than switchboards. But I dare say we are way more than switchboards. Life is way more than right answers and pleasant emotions and pampered bodies. We are made, after all, for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, through the world we safely go. Joy and suffering are distinctly human attributes that reveal our metaphysical self and the part of our personhood that we learn to value through the practice of Christianity. The church, this place, is the training facility where we build habits of the heart that reflect the quality of our character. And as I said 2 Sundays ago, in the age of AI, it is the quality of character. In a world awash with disinformation, it is the quality of character that is going to stand as truth. Character tells the truth. 1 Peter continues to give us insight. The pericope today seems prescient, if not prophetic. Peter writes, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal taking place to test you as though something strange were happening to you." He goes on, "But rejoice in sharing Christ's suffering and be glad and shout for joy." Joy and suffering. Maybe that is where William Blake found his inspiration. Quite likely. When suffering is acknowledged and then owned by the human heart, the soul divine is revealed and joy emerges. Suffering and joy, it is important to know, go together as integrators of the heart and the soul. When we are tested by something strange, as we are being tested right now by something strange, the noble goal of our sovereign reign as royal priests is to have a heart attuned to suffering, supple and open, gentle and humble, vulnerable enough to uncork the joy that bubbles up from the soul divine. Jesus sets this standard, doesn't he? He sets it today in the words we hear from the Gospel of Matthew, "Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. A humble heart is a necessary qualifier to find rest for your souls. A humble heart is incarnationally grounded in the world, right? The word itself makes the claim. Humble finds its origin in the root word humus, doesn't it? Which means earthy and grounded. We were made to walk on well-grounded on this earth. Not as overlords. We weren't made to be overlords of this world, imposing our will upon it for our particular and personal pleasure. We were made to be servants who care for that guy standing outside of Safeway. That's our sovereign duty. That's the role of royalty. We are royalty as ordained by God. But it takes practice. And so we train and we train and we train to be masters of our heart and people of unimpeachable character. It takes courage. This is a moment in history when we must be courageous. We must meet the moment with the necessary paradigm shift that I talked about last Sunday, from prioritizing the small little things that differentiate us in favor of the big things that make us all humans. This is the moment to prioritize our common humanity before the moment passes us by. And it takes courage. Courage is a heart word. The word itself makes the point, as courage finds its origin in the root word cor, which means heart. It's important to realize that the tone of the word courage matches the tone of the word humble. Courage is not about being a hero. It's not about being a warrior or exceptionally brave. It's about being whole and full and complete as a human being. And as we are becoming, because we are becoming creatures, as we are becoming whole and full and complete, we develop the natural capacity or even the habitual tendency to be comfortable, even at home, in the midst of agony and pain and uncertainty. That's what it means to be courageous. That is the courage that sometimes looks like hugging a homeless man outside of Safeway at 9 o'clock in the evening. Joy is revealed when actions of empathy partner with vulnerability, which inevitably connect the heart and the soul. And when this happens, joy bubbles up, and we become our most human selves. And the church, this place, and it has been for 2,000 years, is all about this emergent joy, which is why we are organized as a training ground for habits of the heart. Now, for a decade and a half, you have heard me, some of you have heard me for a decade and a half, talk about spiritual exercises. And you've heard me talk about Epiphany as what? Spiritual gym. All right. And all of those conversations over all of those years, in all of those classes, have pointed us to this moment in time, where now we must be people who habitually prioritize humanity and our commonality rather than the things that divide us. And this forcing function has been put upon us by the presence of generative artificial intelligence, calling us to consider what it means to be human and how we can be better at it and how we can set it as our priority. And the spiritual exercises train towards that end. Worship is a spiritual exercise, and prayer, and fasting, and tithing, and a Sabbath, and studying Scripture, and pilgrimage, and retreats, and small group gatherings. These are exercises that we do to form the human heart. And it enables us to be people of uncompromising character, even when we're not thinking about how we're acting. These are the activities that embolden us to act out our sovereign duty with gentle and humble hearts. Now, I have a lot to say about this. I have a lot to say about the spiritual exercises, and we're going to continue with this conversation over time. But today I want to end by saying, if I'm wrong about AI, and it just sort of fizzles out, or it becomes the best thing that's ever happened to humanity, then we are still called to be people who seek to have an unimpeachable character through habits of the heart. Okay? Or if it turns out that generative artificial intelligence does threaten human communities, we are still called to be people who seek to form unimpeachable character through habits of the heart. Either way, this is who we are because of who our God is. In these very strange times, it is time to double down on our common humanity. This is a time when our Christianity is more relevant than it has been in any of our lives ever. The practice of our faith enables us to be courageous and walk humbly in this brave new world. And we are people of courage because we have Jesus. As Peter reminds us today, we can cast our anxiety upon him because we have the Spirit of God resting upon us. That, more than anything else, is what makes us human. And that's what I'm going to talk about more next Sunday.